And Carla, over to you, please.
Okay, thanks so much, Russ, and hello and welcome to the Federal Government Distance Learning Association's webinar series. I'm Dr. Carla Lane, FGDLA, Vice President of the Higher Education Sector, give myself a raise here, and the moderator for today's webinar. FGDLA is a nonprofit professional association formed to promote the development and application of distance learning in the federal government. We actively foster collaboration and understanding among those involved in leveraging technology and instructional media in support of the education and training needs of the federal government. Our membership is derived primarily from individuals employed by the agencies within the federal government. We invite you to join with us in this exciting field. Our web address is fgdla.us. Our speaker for November 17th is Dr. Say Schatz of ADL. The Social Security Administration's Dr. Benson Opondo will be with us on December 15th. We're so proud that Zoom is a sponsor of FGDLA and has been instrumental in helping us present the webinars. We'd like to thank Zoom and Russ Colbert for sponsoring today's seminar. They are the best partners we could have, and they are one of our new and valued sponsors. Thank you, Russ. Thank you so much.
And Carla, you're the best person in the world to work with. We appreciate you so much. And thank you to everyone for having us provide the platform that can do the webinar today. And oh my goodness, Carla, we've got the best speakers in the world. I know I say that every month, but this time we really do in William and Paul. So I thank them both for joining us today.
I do too, because we're focusing on USA Learning with Will Peratino and Paul Jesukiewicz. They're here to explain the details of OPM's USA Learning. Will is the director of USA Learning and Paul is director of its knowledge portal. Both have been instrumental in the development and the implementation of important and massive projects for the US. They are not only experienced, but passionate about the work that they do to improve education and training to meet our needs. So Will and Paul, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. We're really looking forward to it. The floor is yours.
Carla, Russ, again, thank you for the opportunity to share what we're doing at USA Learning relative to some of our innovative projects for the rest of the federal government and Department of Defense. So.
Thank you, William.
So, first slide, please.
Yeah, we see it.
Next slide, I'm sorry. So just to give everyone an overview of USA Learning that does not have the background, we started as an eGov initiative back in 2002, commissioned by the White House and the Office of Management and Budget. The original name was Go Learn, but the intent behind this was to eliminate the redundancy of all the different federal agencies buying different non-interoperable learning management systems. And about 8 years ago, we decided, because our organization within the Office of Personnel Management, Human Resource Solutions, has different business lines. In another life at OPM, I was the director of USA Jobs. So we've got USA Jobs, USA Performance, USA Staffing, and it just made sense for us to brand our online learning, distance learning, centralized capability as USA Learning. So that's where the name change occurred, and that was the intent behind it. The challenge that OMB had was they give all the agencies money to do all their mandatory training on an annual basis. And they had no way to have visualization across the government landscape as to what was taking place. And one of the first LRS implementations that we're going to show you this afternoon is an exact example of how we were able to concatenate from multiple physically distributed LMSs data into a data lake and then show it in compiled, customized dashboards for different views. Next slide.
And Will, if I could speak to your team for just a second, please don't forget to share your screen when you're transmitting your slides. So it's just the green, selecting of the green icon, share screen, and then everyone will be able to see your slides.
So can you see the service operating model slide now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Excellent.
So here's essentially our operating model. that we've established as a centralized entity for USA Learning. So think of us as the government-wide learning ecosystem in the center. And the data lake that I mentioned is down in the lower right. We have different transport layers and connective capabilities to external systems and data sources. But what we're really interested in the federal government is a way to store on an individual basis digital badges, individual transcripts, certificates of completions, and different accreditations, because that would allow people, centrally individuals, to transfer from agency to agency and have all their transcripts and everything automatically transfer with them. So next slide, please. This is just a real quick view. It's an eye chart, but I wanted everyone to get a sense of the footprint that we have across not just the Department of Defense, but the federal agencies. Last year, we did over 24 million training completions within the landscape that we support. And these are all customers of ours. So typically, if you see a very large learning management system effort within the government, we're behind the scenes procuring the system and many times running the system for that customer agency. Next slide.
So Will, on this slide, what we were going to do is as Will mentioned, we're running multiple systems across the federal landscape and DoD. And one of the systems that we built about 10 years ago is open source. We leverage that. So we're delivering across over 50 government entities using that same core code base. But when you look at each one, they look differently. So there's different dashboards, integration with subdomains. So, you know, not every customer uses every feature and function. So when we work with our customers, we start with their requirements. What are they trying to do? And a lot of times they, in previous cases, went out and purchased an LMS and they're like, hey, we're not even using half of the capabilities. We don't need all that. So we work everything requirements-based and configure it in the system to meet their requirements. So John or Rob, if you want, maybe we can just jump and show a few just so you can get an example of what they look like. This is the Department of Engineering Learning Nucleus. You can see kind of how that looks. And what we wanted was the ability to jump around and have different, you know, features and functions based on their requirements. So you can see how it looks here. And then maybe we can jump over to the OPM learning connections. So same back-end system, but again, a little bit of different look and feel. They're using different other modules here when you see the Welcome to OPM Learning Connection. So the course catalog, the online courses. So in most cases in the federal side, they're using the SF-182, they're using IDPs. But again, it depends on our customer and what features and functions they're looking for. And I think if you jump to the GSA one, you'll see a whole different look and feel here. So the goal is leveraging our system built on open source. So we're not paying an annual license or per user fee, but it allows that customization. We also, though, support our customers with commercial off-the-shelf systems. So you'll see a range of systems like Cornerstone, SAP, Blackboard, Meridian, you know, the list goes on. There's lots of systems out there. So again, what we try to do is work with our customers, not, again, force a system on them, but find out what best meets their requirements to include the resources that are needed for that. Will, anything else on that?
No, I think that's enough.
Okay. You can go to the next slide.
Paul, why don't you talk about the ecosystem and what we're doing within this environment?
So what we've come to find is our customers in the federal and DoD landscape, they're not just using one system or one product. It's usually a culmination of lots of them. So what's been kind of the theme we've seen the last couple of years is what's known as an ecosystem, which is a system of systems. So there's an LMS, but that's not the only thing running. There's usually a collaborative learning environment, especially the last couple of years with COVID. We've seen a lot more of that collaborative learning environment. A lot of customers in the federal side started out with things like Adobe Connect, but now you're seeing what we're using today, which works well, which is Zoom. You have Zoom for Government, which is also FedRAMP. You've got lots of other products out there, but that system needs to be integrated, and that's what we do as part of the ecosystem. So how does a collaborative learning environment interface with the LMS? interface with other applications like an assessment engine or authentication services. Will mentioned the learner record. All these things have to work together. And we want to be able to then mine that data in this system and the analytics. And that's what you'll see here in a little bit later as we do a live demo of us digging into those analytics around that data and coming up with dashboards for that particular customer, whether it's at the individual level, at the chief learning officer level, all the way up to OMB. Next slide. So we're going to transition now into a thing called Experience API, which is what's behind a learning record store. So those not familiar with the Experience API, or it's also known as XAPI, years ago when I was at ADL, we started a research project called Tin Can that evolved to what XAPI is today. So what does that mean? There's lots of learning happening. Most of the learning that people are familiar with is the traditional learning, whether that's what was in the classroom, but also online, informal learning. What we've seen the shift in the last many years is how do you track informal learning, social learning, mobile learning? Lots of tools out there that are doing micro learning, micro credentialing. I may be in a game or a virtual environment. And if I go into one of those environments, a lot of times in the past, you would go in and it didn't know anything about me. It didn't take my learner record in there and then customize that experience. So you want that ability to adapt that learning to those experiences in environments beyond just an LMS. So as we do that and you go through one of those environments, at the end of it, you want to be able to take your data with you. So if I just learned something in the classroom, I then took an online refresher, maybe I took some certification, and then I'm in the field, maybe I'm going through a simulation or something just to validate that I still have the competence. I want to be able to then go through that whole environment and at the end of it, have that data transfer with me. So when I go do the next learning experience, it then captures what I've already done. Otherwise, I go in and I have to start a whole new profile, a fresh start, and it's like Groundhog's Day where you're just repeating, going through a bunch of PowerPoints and hitting next and really not adapting that learning. So XAPI is a way to collect those experiences. And if you go to the next slide, we'll go into why would we need XAPI. And for those that have been around, Will and I were there during the early days of START and SCORM to have interoperability of content. We want to be able to have those experiences happen on many systems, not just a single LMS. So XAPI is the communication protocol that allows you to track learning experiences, and they're known as activity streams, in a thing called a learning record store, LRS. I don't know, records are really not around much as far as music records, but records in general, a lot of people call them, training jackets, e-portfolios, digital backpacks, but ultimately that's kind of what the learning record store is. And the way it's done is through human readable statements. So if Will read a book, Will took a course, Will had an assessment that actor verb object is how it's being done in capturing that activity and bringing that back into tracking within the learning management system, as well as the LRS. Next slide. So the concept or operations with the learning record store is I want to capture all that information. So as I talked about earlier, I could be on my mobile phone, I could be in a virtual world. I may be a Navy pilot there on the flight line and I'm on the job tracking something.
He was talking about
something?
The flight line. We lost you for just a second, Paul, but you were talking about the best branch of the service, the U.S. Navy.
Well, I don't want to offend anybody, but yes. Besides that, you want to be able to capture attending an FGDLA conference. So if I'm at FGDLA, what did I learn? How do I capture that activity and bring that back into the learning record store? So these are the type of things we're getting into, especially as you get into new things like AR, VR, and some of the more micro credentialing type courses that we're seeing. So the user experience does not change as the records are being captured. So it's the ability to document all that, and that's what we're looking for. So you have a more robust training profile, because typically our training jackets or training records are very superficial. I completed a course, or I did that, I got a certificate. But if you look below the surface at your learning DNA of everything that you've done, that's going to give you a better chance of knowing what you actually understood, the competencies and skills to then reflect a better profile of that individual. Next slide. So just another depiction of the LRS capturing out there. At the bottom, we've got the dashboard in the front end to that. And on the right, we're reaching out to multiple things, whether that's a video player, could be a TED Talk, some type of informal learning. You know, obviously the LMSs are a key part of this as well. Now the LRS can run independent of the LMS or integrated. So it depends on how you're using it. And in most cases, especially on the federal government side, we already have LMSs in place. So we want to be able to leverage that. But you could hypothetically go ahead and use the LRS instead of the LMS if that was, you know, deemed necessary. Next slide. So we'll talk about the government-wide dashboard, and Will, if you want to jump in here too, based on maybe starting out with why did we want to do these different dashboards? And this was part of a prototype effort about 5 years ago at OPM when we learned about XAPI and Learning Record Store and wanted to see, does this work and can it scale in government? So we wanted to do a proof of concept, and we have 3 areas that we'll go through before we get into some actual customer live demos.
Yeah, let me describe the problem statement that resulted in this prototype. As I mentioned earlier, OMB gives all the agencies money to support their mandatory training initiatives on an annual basis. But OMB had no visibility as to how the agencies were complying with that mandatory training and what goes on a daily basis and what's being expended. So we connected multiple physically distributed LMSs through XAPI statements to capture the training events that were ongoing real time so that an OMB executive could look at a dashboard and look across the entire array of the executive side of federal government, cabinet level side, at all the agencies and see what was going on relative to the mandatory training. And that's real-time visualization of the data. It's not data that's pushed out and you know, updated on a 24-hour basis or whatever. They can do it real time. The other request we had was for that same data within the individual agency for their CLO to have the same view of what's taking place in that agency relative to mandatory training. And then we took it a step further and said for the individual learner, we want them to have control of their own learning records and what they put into their, Paul called it a electronic training jacket. We call it a career management account. There've been a lot of terms, but if you today try to go to your transcripts, you don't really own them. The academic institution that you went to owns the transcript, and typically you have to pay to get a copy to append it to your resume so that you can apply for a job. We think that's a little dysfunctional. So we're trying to flip that equation on its head and put the learner and the owner that's had the training or education experiences and holds the certifications and accreditations, they should have that transcript and be able to move it with them when they go from agency to agency. So let us show you those 3 dashboard examples now. And for the, in the interest of time, what we've done is record these as videos with audio explanations to hopefully make this quicker. But during the question and answer section at the end, more than happy to answer any questions relative to these. You want to go ahead? Do the OMB example first, please.
So go ahead to the next one, and we get into. You can go ahead and do the OMB one. Yep.
The OMB Administrator dashboard shows data across all agencies. We are logged in under the OMB role to view government-wide statistics. The dataset allows the OMB Administrator to see graphs and charts that compare data across multiple agencies by date and agency selected. This graph shows the top 10 most active agencies with the ability to filter out selected agency activity. By toggling on and off agency data display, we can focus in on specific organizations. By selecting Navy, we can display just their learning activities. Now let's take a look at mandatory training utilization and compliance by agency. This view allows you to drill down by agency and see agency compliance with mandatory annual training requirements. Selecting OPM shows the percentage of completed mandatory courses and the percentage of enrollments for 3 mandatory sample courses: No Fear Act, USERA, and New Employee Ethics Training.
Paul, did you want to go to the next video now? Or
Yeah,
back to, okay.
Yep, no, let's go back, let's go to the next one. So we did the, that was the OMB level. So at a high level, we want to be able to roll up all this information. You know, a lot of people in government are familiar with EHRI, and when you look at that type of data, it's kind of archaic because it's not real time. It's usually 6 months or later out of date. So that was the goal there. But also within an agency, you got the CLO, so we can look at, see how that's done. So let's run through the CLO video, and then we'll talk about the individual.
This is the agency CLO dashboard, which shows the data across the entire agency, starting with total activity, completions, enrollments, recently active courses, and on through most recent sessions. The CLO can see all enrollments and filter on any of the fields to produce more focused views of the data by toggling on and off specific variables on the right-hand side. A CLO can look at specific individual activity by specifying timeframes using the slide bar on the graph. Next, the CLO can review compliance with mandatory courses displayed in bar graphs. In addition to viewing agency data, the CLO or their designee can also approve informal training activities to assign agency credit for successful completion that an individual has uploaded. Previously, John Doe uploaded a virtual conference completion certificate and documented attendance. In order to validate this informal learning, the CLO needs to curate the event. This is done by selecting informal learning, reviewing the pending activity, and approving the event.
So as you can imagine, in government, we've got lots of certificates. As a matter of fact, I've got a 3-ring binder that's, I forget, 20, 30 years old of old certificates. So what do I do with those? Obviously, in the last, so many years, 10 or so, we've moved to a digital environment. So there are digital certificates in addition to, paper ones. So we need that ability to be able to handle all that type of information. And the idea is that, there's courses you can take today, like a Microsoft certification, and it automatically populates your LinkedIn profile with a validated credential. So that's what we're talking about here with the Learning Record Store. And the Learner Record is, I want the ability to manage all those records. And maybe I'm doing a lot of, training outside of my job. I'm, getting other types of certifications. I'm improving, my portfolio. So I want the ability to bring all that information in there, because that way I have a better learning experience and a better chance, as we will mention, as we're tying into things like USA Jobs and performance, I want it to affect those systems as well. So let's go to the the individual.
Most online learning activities will use the international standard, XAPI, to automate the loading of learning records into the LRS. There will be learning events that must be self-reported to be included in a curated transcript. USA Learning has created an informal learning event documentation capability that allows individuals to self-report learning that is not being recorded automatically. For example, a learner attends a virtual HR training conference and enters details describing the event. The learner can upload their conference attendance certificate. This self-reporting feature displays the learning event as a pending item for the CLO to review.
So again, just another example of how can we deal with the past, legacy as well as the future, and we need that capability. So that's why we built that in. May not seem like anything, high tech, but we have to be able to work in that type of environment as we migrate from system to system to be able to bring those records in. So as we're working with the USA Learning LMS, we can bring in bulk uploads of, different course completions from other systems. And now with the LRS, we're able to capture also now the informal learning. So it gives you that ability to do both, which I think is critical. Okay, let's move on. So what we thought we'd do now is, I know there's some questions, but I thought we didn't want to miss any time as far as giving you some live examples of our customers that are using it. Because we get a lot of questions like, well, I heard XAPI and LRSs, but is anyone actually using it? Well, the largest adoption, believe it or not, is in the US Navy. And I know Russ was giving the Navy a plug earlier. And it's not just one organization with the Navy, it's multiple. We also have within the Secretary of Defense, the Financial Readiness Office known as FinRed doing it. Carla mentioned in the next webinar coming up next month, Say Schatz, she's from the Advanced Learning Initiative. She has a sandbox effort with us, working multiple projects that tie into her total learning architecture. So the LRS is one of those. DAU, Defense Academy Universities, also started just recently a sandbox effort with us, and they're trying to determine how they're going to use it. And we also have the Defense Health Agency. But right now, we're going to dive into some examples that both the Navy and OSD are doing, so you can see how they're doing it. And it's going to be a little different as you look at how OSD is doing it compared to Navy. And that's the beauty of the XAPI and LRS, because it can be adapted and used for multiple purposes and applications. So John and Rob, you may want to jump now over to maybe starting with the Navy example.
Yep, let me take it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. And then we'll address the questions coming up in the chat as soon as we're done with the demos.
So yeah, I'll just take about 10 minutes to walk through a couple of different customers who are using the system in various ways. You'll see they all look very similar, but they do have different brands and different splash screens and colors. They've all been customized for the different agencies, but it's all the same piece of software running in the USA Learning systems. Let me log into the Naval Air Training Command system here. And I'll just show you briefly. This is a nice one to use. I had to get through my compliance banner there. I'll show you briefly just a little bit of the software. We'll click around it for a second. This is a pretty standard deployment. So this is the interface for one of their data sets. I'll show you another one in a moment. Earlier, Paul mentioned that the data format is kind of human readable, like Sean initialized developing data products. That is, somewhat human readable piece of information. Under the hood, there's of course a lot more context to what that really means. There's all kinds of stuff in here. I won't go into that in a lot of detail, but this is what the data set would look like. Now, this one is tiny. It's got just under 2,000 data points in it. Really, it's a toy data set for purposes of this demonstration. Real data sets would be millions or hundreds of millions, and I think we did near the beginning of this year a kind of a trial run of 1 billion data points in the USAL LRS, just to kick the tires a little bit and to say that we had done it. This is a very quick example of the kind of integrated dashboards that are available. All this stuff is generated on the fly in real time. Obviously, there's all kinds of mechanisms for customization as well. You can go in here and edit all these things and get these nice building tools to sort of do your data analytics and click all this together to build these different visualizations. That is a skill that there's a lot to it. It's a very deep and complex system that is very powerful and can be used to realize a lot of interesting benefits as far as analyzing the data. This particular user, the Navy Air Command, also has a content library inside of the learning record store, as opposed to the learning management system. And one of the things that the learning record store can do is exercise some content launch. So, if you want to play XAPI-enabled content and you'd like to record that information and get it back, you can have the learning record store sort of initiate the content playback to the student, and then we automatically capture all this data. I'll show you just one quick cool thing here. Let me mute it there, which is our 360 video. This is one of the content types that we can play back. It's 360. We're getting all kinds of analytics around how people are moving around this environment, click and pause and play and all of that. I'll show you later how we'll get to that and see that data. But Another thing that is very cool about this particular experience is if you did have an Oculus Rift headset on, then you would be seeing this, all around you. You could look around as if you're really flying the thing. Obviously, on a screen share like this, that doesn't really work, but you can just as easily play it back in the browser normally if you don't have access to that kind of a headset. Let me show you a couple other things that are being used in different ways. So this is the My Navy portal implementation of the USAL Learning Record Store. I'm very careful to say Learning Record Store, Learning Management System. It's very easy to trip them up, and I'm very careful to say it correctly because it can get very confusing quickly if you start doing the wrong one. So what I want to show you here is actually the integration with the learning management system. This is what their skin looks like, and we'll pop in and look at some of these things later. But mostly what you're going to see in this demonstration is the integration with the USA Learning Management System. I've got a course that we've built in the LMS here that illustrates a bunch of different capabilities. I'm just going to show you a couple of them very quickly because I'm trying to keep this to about 10 minutes. I mentioned that one of the things that the Learning Record Store can do is play content. And you might wonder, well, do people have to log into that? And how do we do federation of identity? And how do we make the data correlate between all the courses and classes if they're two separate systems? Well, we've thought of that. The USA Learning Record Store has a very deep and robust integration with the learning management system. And we offer up a lot of the services that the Learning Record Store can do, a lot of the capabilities of the Learning Record Store, almost as a plugin to the learning management system. It's not the only way to get there. I just showed you going through the LRS directly, but if you have the LMS and you're using the LMS, it's pretty easy to leverage the integration. Let me show you that. I'll show you the exact same piece of video. I'm just going to click video, and then it's going to pop up in my browser. So this is the exact same piece of content, works exactly the same way. But what is great about this is it's transparently integrated with the learning management system. And you'll notice that nothing happened, right? It's a great demo because you don't even see much of anything. That just you click the button and the video plays. But we're actually doing some really awesome things in the background where there's a handshake between the learning management system and the learning record store. The student identity is captured, and then we're able to leverage the playback capabilities of the LRS and also integrate the associated data analytics back into the learning management system. I almost missed it. So the Learning Record Store knows what types of content are what. We asked it to play a video, so it knows this thing was a video. So when I ask it, hey, bring me some data analytics about this thing, it says, oh, well, it's a video. We're going to pull up the video histogram. This shows us how people are moving through the video over time. It's pretty clear in the general flow of my demo that I'll start the thing playing, and then I'll hit pause at some point and keep speaking. And you can see that generally, like the number of playback falls off over time. A pattern that we see in the real world is people jumping to the end of the video in order to get the next button to light up in some systems, right? That's an important thing that you can see when you're capturing more information about how people are interacting with your learning content, especially if you're paying a lot of money to develop an hour-long video and you can discover, hey, my systems told me 5,000 people watched it. And then you discover, yeah, but 4,900 of them watched like the first 2 minutes and the last 2 minutes. And the center portion was just completely abandoned. Something you might want to know.
Yeah, Rob, I was just going to jump in. So that's an important thing. Obviously, we spend a lot of money on content development, and video is very expensive. So the instructors need to know what's really happening. And typically, you couldn't in the past. You just assume that they were watching a video, but in most cases they would start it. Maybe they go off and do some laundry, mow the lawn, come back, and at the end. So again, we'll know now what's really happening there. And so it gives you, again, the ability that we didn't have before with a lot of the analytic tools that we now have.
Another thing I'll pull up here is the assessment dashboard. So the learning management system has an integrated quiz engine in it, but we can analyze the data that comes out of that over in the Learning Record Store to present a lot of very nice test item analysis renderings, things like completion over time. This particular dashboard is mostly just a visualization of how responses are spread across all of the different choices and all the questions. All this is populated dynamically. It's just kind of generated on the fly. I'll note that while this is integrated with the quiz engine that is part of the learning management system, you could supply the learning record store with this kind of data from some other source and get the same kinds of output from it. There's also all kinds of tooling that we can leverage to say, well, how does the spread change over time? Or how does the spread change if we're only considering E6s or whatever? Right? There's a universe of different sort of analytic capabilities that are available once we have captured all this information. So I
Hey, Rob,
mentioned, yep.
Can I just jump in just for one thing also as well that I think might be very interesting is, so Rob mentioned that, this data is coming from the LMS and other, an app, for example, a mobile app can be instrumented to do the same thing. It doesn't have to necessarily come from the LMS. However, what's very interesting about this is we get a lot of questions about, okay, I want to do XAPI. I want to take advantage of these analytics. How much work is it? What do my developers have to do? How do my instructional designers have to behave differently? What do they have to do differently? What processes do they follow, et cetera? And in some cases, yeah, if you want to instrument a mobile app, it is an intentional thing that a content developer, a mobile app developer has to build in to track out that XAPI. But what's interesting about this solution is using the USA learning management system, we're automatically able to get that XAPI data without any work on the end users. Just create a SCORM course, just create an assessment like you always have, and we're able to automatically pull in that data and get those visualizations.
Absolutely.
And John and Rob, real quick, just to add to that, I think there were some questions earlier, like, not only how hard is it, but, who's using it? So, I mean, years ago, there wasn't a lot of products out there. And like I said, how, just like the early days of the web and no one had a web development tool or the authoring tool days that we went through for learning content. How's the industry now as far as adoption of XAPI and, what tools are out there? Obviously, we have ours, but I think there's others emerging too. So how seamless is that? And obviously, I think there'll be more adoption over time, but just kind of a pulse of where things are with that.
Yep, and John, I did not forget to sort of follow up on it isn't necessarily that the learning management system is the only source of data. That is one source of data that we've already integrated very tightly, but it's completely possible to send information into the learning record store from outside sources. This is the Sense project.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to just real quickly to follow up on Paul's thing also is that, as far as adoption and support for tools, the major authoring tools are now supporting XAPI for the most part. They started off with versions a couple of years ago, and it was at the time there was not a lot of good XAPI guidance from us building the spec at the time. So the implementations varied a lot. So if you wanted real interoperability between those authoring tools that you were using, it was tough. Since then, they've gotten a lot better. So Rob was just showing those graphs around, like, matching and the multiple choice. Most of the authoring tools will actually generate data that's compatible with that. As far as general adoption, I just think one note is important. We also volunteer for the IEEE standardization organization, and XAPI is going through IEEE standardization right now. It's getting closer. It's been a long and slow process, but we have a really large group of organizations and individuals who are implementing this and are seeing it through. So adoption has increased quite a lot as it's become more stable and as the authoring tools have gotten better. So I know it's anecdotal, but yeah, things are a lot better now than they were 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I was going to mention the IEEE, so thanks for doing that, because I think that's important to have standardization, and that will go a long way, especially in government.
Yep. So what we're looking at here is a kind of a very different example, but utilizing all the same things under the hood. In this case, it's OSD has the Financial Readiness Office, and they have an application called the Sense Project, which is a mobile app which has training information in it about how to manage your finances. There's a lot of great content in there. But Important to note, it's not a website. It's not a learning management system that sits inside of USA Learning. It's an app that you can get from the App Store. You can do it right now, and it will report information back to the USA LRS. And we've developed a customized data platform for the content authors to go in there and sort of analyze how people are using their content, what's working, what's not working. In this case, we opted to build something custom. So this is styled very much like the application on your phone would be styled, with the colors and the coins and everything. But also what's important is it takes a lot of the analytics capabilities that are possible in the behind the scenes data system and boils them down into something that these people can just click to get. They don't necessarily have to exercise the full analytic tools to just get the canned reports that we've built for them. In this case, there's information about how do people move through the different sections on the app, and we can sort of trace their paths and see how they're going through the application and see how they move from one section to another. We also capture some demographic information via a questionnaire at the beginning of the app. But what's important here is that this is a very different use case where information is flowing from an entirely new type of media content, and we're still able to integrate all that back with the other data from the learning management systems and correlate and associate that data. I have one other demo to show, which is just another sort of custom dashboard. This one is something we built very bespoke for Naval Education Training Command to look at how classes of students are progressing through their content. This is notable in that a lot of the discussions that we make and a lot of the demos we make are kind of big data topics. Of all of these, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users, what are the general trends for how they're using this content or passing these courses? It's absolutely possible to use the same technologies to manage small groups of students. In this case, I think there's like 20 people in each class. And then we've instrumented the system to pull up a couple of notifications about this Alfred Von guy has not done his assessments. And then Matilda has done one of the assessments 8 times. So the system has kind of picked up that these are unusual behaviors. We're also able to do things like say, well, for this given class, how does their average compare to the average across the entire population of students? We have a little bit of visualization. Here's this Alfred Von guy who has done nothing. So that explains why he hasn't done his assessments. And this goes on through several different sort of modules that they're supposed to attempt. There's also information in here about their assessments, who has the top scores, who's attempted more. Here's Bella taking it 4 times. That's interesting. And we can also pull means and standard deviations across scores. And if we so desired, we could go in and see this kind of sliced on any profile information about the student or what time of day it happened or what have you. But it's absolutely possible to manage these things with something that's a little bit more customized. This is interesting. Here's somebody has an exceptionally long attempt. And a couple of people missing some courses. But this is just another iteration of the same fundamental data systems, this time kind of skinned for the management of a class of people rather than big data analytics. And there's just an infinite number of different things we could do with this, but this is just a couple of the instances that are out there right now working. You think, Paul, is there anything else you want me to hit?
No, I think that was, the key stuff I wanted to go over. I mean, there's obviously a lot more you can dive into any area here. I think it's just important to understand that there's so much power here that we just didn't have in the past. We're used to using, the traditional systems out there, and there's a lot more capability now with big data, the AI and the analytics that now come into play. But, how do we use it? So if I'm an individual, I want my Fitbit for learning. I want to know every little thing I need to do as I'm going through, versus if I'm at the agency, or maybe I'm an instructor at an agency and I'm finding now they're skipping all my video in my courses, or, they're having problems with question 5. They're all having, an issue. So it gives you that type of analytics. And at the chief learning officer level, I could start rolling things up going, well, not only who met the mandatory training, why are we still having security, cybersecurity issues? They all took the training, but obviously they didn't learn anything because we're having these problems. So it digs into that type of data, and ultimately our goal is, as we look at things like EHRA reporting that goes up to the OMB, how do we give them a better snapshot of what's really happening, not just what the way it's currently done traditionally? Well, anything?
Let me ask you a quick question. How would an instructional designers for any of these institutions then be able to use this? I mean, because I see an awful lot of things I would love to know as an ID.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully with, as Rob and Jono mentioned, with the tools that are out there, the authoring tools and things like that that have adopted, they'll become a little more transparent. But I think the idea is that, you know, using the tools, or we can certainly work with them to have them better understand the value and the tools that are in these products so they can take advantage of them, because they just may not know they're there. They just, you know, it's part of an education process, things like this FGDLA to make it known, but also the authoring tools and the other applications that are out there that are using it can help highlight that. And we can give real life examples and make sure that, you know, that word spreads.
That's amazing. What a system.
Paul, you may want to also mention that a lot of the commercial entities have adopted the XAPI standard. So like we can, anything off of, I think the was YouTube earlier, we can, you know, catalog the events that occurred during that video. And then a lot of the commercial content providers have adopted it. So do you have that list off the top of your head?
Well, they range. I mean, your standard products, you know, your Adobes and those type of tools, but certainly even the LMS vendors now have gotten into that. Some have completely adopted it, and others are still, you know, in the process. So it varies, but now that the IEEE standardization has been happening, there's been, you know, a lot more rigor as far as having it as a formal standard. Because, you know, whenever there's competing specs and standards out there, everyone seems to wait, you know, VHS versus beta, or, you know, DVD and all those things that we've gone through over the years. But, you know, that's kind of what our initial intent was when I was developing SCORM and then rolling into XAPI, was to have that, you know, standardization in place, give some stability so then adoption can occur and make sure it's widespread adoption.
Paul, I'll mention, yeah, all of the big authoring tools, you know, Lectora, Domino, Captivate, Storyline, all the typical players in the content authoring space have a XAPI export function now, and we've seen a lot of that data. It's pretty good. It wasn't great 5 years ago, but it's very workable these days. So we find that to be a large source of actually the data that comes from the outside comes from one of those tools.
Yes,
I'll also
absolutely.
note,
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to note. There's a question about how an instructional designer would use the tool, and you know, you can see especially that chart that was on the screen a moment ago with paths. I think is always very interesting to designers about how people choose to move through content. But there's also some data concerns that we have very good answers to, such as who can see what data when. It's absolutely possible for us to configure a user role such that an instructional designer can, you know, get into the system and get all these charts and graphs, but limited to their set of beta users or themselves or anything. I mean, there's a very robust system for permission management that is not, it's too boring for me to show in this, but that's absolutely a capability that we have.
So Rob, could you actually do research? I mean, you could pull the data and do statistical analysis to see when are people dropping out of a video, or are they using microlearning more than they are longer videos. I mean, so that sort of research would be so useful to us as instructional designers.
Sure,
I mean,
you can use some of the integrated tooling that we've got, but we also have kind of export modules for feeding into some of the more common business analytics tools. If you find that our integrated tooling is not quite what you need, you want to bring it into our studio or something like that, we can absolutely help you with that.
and I'm assuming you can hang things off of it too. If somebody came to you and said, I really need to know this, this, and this, and it's not there, you could do a bit of magical programming and be able to pull some figures like that would really help.
We can. It's not, I mean, sometimes magic is hard, sometimes magic is easy. We always try to pretend like it's easy, but those questions become very specific very quickly about what's possible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the other
I think-
thing the other thing to mention is there's a range of learning record store systems out there. So just like LMSs, there's probably, I don't know, there used to be thousands. I know there's at least hundreds and hundreds are still out there, both commercial and open source. Same thing's happening on the LRS side. So you'll see a range of some open source as well as commercial systems. At USA Learning, we try to, do everything requirements based. So we're agnostic as far as if one versus the other is going to work. It really depends on your situation. As Carl was mentioning, maybe I'm an instructor designer trying to use it versus an agency CLO versus an individual. So, we look at it, we look at the requirements and see what's out there on the market. Again, both commercial and open source, or in some cases, there may be GOTS, government off the shelf as well. So we then work with you and our customers on the federal and DoD side to then determine what might work best. And in some cases, we got to give them some options because, it could be a resource constraint, like, hey, I only have, 10K, what can I get for that? So those are the type of things that we do at USA Learning, is work through that and help out our customers and then give them the information they need to make a more informed decision.
So you're saying
Yeah,
that the
just
federal
to-
government charges, one agency charges another agency. I always love that. So go ahead.
Yes.
So just to emphasize, we purposely, the USA Learning team stress tested our own LRS environment. As Rob mentioned earlier, we stress tested up to the billions of records because a lot of the LRSs that are out there commercially available aren't really designed for enterprise-wide implementation for huge data management. So the value add that we bring to the government equation is we kick the tires on all these products. And as Paul mentioned, we let the customer's requirements dictate and direct what the ultimate integrated solution is. So the customer gets an optimal end state solution to meet their requirements, as opposed to them picking something and then 5 years later realizing they made a bad decision.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing to add to that, sorry, caller, to what Will just said, was one of the big concerns these days is cybersecurity. So the USA Learning LRS, as well as the LMS, is FedRAMP authorized at the moderate level. And so we work with our customers to make sure we're meeting the security requirements. So that's another thing when you're out there looking for systems, is to make sure that you go to the FedRAMP site and, make sure they're meeting that, or towards meeting that, because that's a critical thing and a requirement that we have as well as our government customers.
Yeah, that's a fabulous system. I'm envious of you being able to do that, because I only have an LMS at 2 universities. So, and tracking students and what they've done, even for milestones toward their dissertations. I mean, it's next to impossible. You get one sheet at the beginning of the semester and that's the end of it. So I'm going to have my universities call you.
Well, it's interesting too, Carla, that you've seen the things that we've done thus far, but as Rob mentioned earlier, the universe of what you can use this for is almost infinite.
Yeah.
It's the limits are really your imagination, and because we're not conditioned to think in the context of there are no limits. So how would we like to concatenate data? How would we like to visualize it? And how can we best put it to use to help us make informed decisions? Those are the things we're not used to having full control over. And now you really have that landscape.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you. Okay, we're coming to the end of things. Are there questions that need answering? Russ, I haven't looked at the chat room in a few minutes.
Carla, I have been watching and I don't see any questions that remain open.
Yeah, I've been answering some as we went along. So I think again, if there's any others, we can certainly address those now, and if not, we can always follow up as well.
There was one question very early on from Jay, and he asked, does the VA have, how does he get the VA involved? So just as, maybe not just talk about the VA, but if there was an agency that came to you, what is it you would sort of put them through, just briefly? What would they need to do?
Well, customers many times come to us with an idea or a set of requirements. And what we help them do is refine or articulate those requirements in a context that can be actionable. Many times they don't know what they want. Sometimes they come in and say, here's what I want. And after we work with them in a couple of initial meetings, we really find out that's not going to meet their needs. So it's a information exchange. It has to take place first so that we understand what their real requirements are and how, and especially how they need to evolve over time. Because what somebody thinks they need today, if they don't understand that they have all these possibilities in the landscape, they can actually design for several years out, which they couldn't do before. Everyone's trying to put out the current fire. And we're trying to get them to understand, let's build a foundation that you can evolve over time, that'll evolve as your requirements evolve. That's the solution that we need in government.
Yep,
So,
yep. And sometimes our customers come from a conference and they, a vendor XYZ got demonstrated and they're like, hey, this thing's the greatest thing since sliced bread. We want this. And that's really not the requirement. That's what they think is a solution to requirement. So as Will said, we walk them through and it may or may not be. We just want to make sure they're making a more informed decision.
yeah,
Carla, there's a question from Jay Allen.
okay.
What if we want to replace success factors?
Yeah, and Jay, you're only allowed 3 questions in an event, but I'll let you have the 4th one. But the answer to that is we've done that, and it's not, again, trying to put one against another. So Department of Energy went through that. They went through the migration of Plateau, Success Factors, SAP, and they then ultimately over time worked with us and decided that based on the analysis that the USA Learning LMS was a better solution for them. They had multiple subcomponents, multiple requirements. And so again, one size doesn't fit all. We go through that. We have some customers that, like the National Gallery of Art that are like 200 users. And then we have other customers, Defense Counterintelligence Cybersecurity Agency, the Navy. I mean, we're talking 850,000 plus, where, some customers are like DCSA, we're pumping 250,000 course completions a day during their campaign last year. So, I mean, that's the type of, so you can imagine we have to have that flexibility and scalability in our systems, both the LMS and LRS. And, depending on if that's a commercial product or open source, it has to be able to handle that as well as the security requirements.
Yeah, and let me just reemphasize, one of the business models that I built into this program initially back in the early 2000s was we wanted to be totally agnostic because this technology moves way too fast for us to, as the government, invest in one solution because it'll quickly become antiquated. So we wanted to design not just our systems and our infrastructure to be adaptable, but the contract mechanisms that we use to acquire these applications, products, and services. So it has to be a marriage of all those elements so that you can have the flexibility that you need and accommodate new and emerging technologies as they become available, exploit existing ones to the furthest extent that you can, but not get pigeonholed into a single solution. Everyone always thinks if we all use the same thing, we'll be better off. We don't ascribe to that policy. We think we want customers that are bread and butter, that are using current technology. We want customers that are really pushing the bleeding edge. That way, from a centralized perspective, all of our customers win because we're keeping the lights on with the current technology, but we're learning with the bleeding edge stuff, and we merge the two to the benefit of our customer base. And you saw the customer base we have on the federal side. It's approaching 90% of all the learning management systems and learning products and services across that landscape.
Wow. Hey, Will and Paul, I just want to take the time to thank you for your service to the U.S. federal government and to the Department of Defense and for all of our government agencies and departments. You guys have done amazing work, great accomplishments for you and your team with us today. We greatly appreciate and thank you. Carla, over to you.
Yeah, and I want to add my thanks to it as well, and to all of you who joined us today for being part of FGDLA. We do want to thank, and this is, takes a village, Will Peratino, Paul Jesukiewicz, Rob, Jonathan, Courtney, and Russ Colbert, and Zoom for all their support and help and sponsorship today. That concludes the webinar. Thank you for joining us. Good night.